Hey y'all, welcome back. In my previous videos I was giving you basic information that came from a bunch of different nerds to lay the foundation for this series. From now on I'll be nerd whispering what specific nerds have said with information from other nerds thrown in from time to time. Although lots of them have talked about the real conflict in American politics for over 2 centuries, to me it's Thom Hartman who explains it best in this book, published in 2006. Throughout this series, I'm going to want to begin by telling you a little about the nerd whose book I'm nerd whispering. That way you understand where he or she is coming from. That's important because everybody has their own perspective, and understanding theirs helps you to be more respectful of them, especially if you disagree with their ideas or opinions. For example, Mr. Hartman is a liberal, pretty much a Bernie Sanders type. And as a conservative-leaning independent, I disagree with him on quite a few issues. For example, 3-word slogans like Medicare for all. For those of us who understand how Medicare works, it's ridiculous. Hopefully someday we'll be able to have an intelligent, respectful debate over affordable health care. Not just a 3-word slogan, but a sensible idea that the vast majority of Americans would be for. Even lefty liberals, if they would actually think about it. The point is that Mr. Hartman is a liberal, but a true nerd when it comes to political research. And his work has contributed significantly to we the people's understanding of how our political and economic systems got as messed up as they did. Obviously, whenever I'm nerd whispering a book, I'm going to want to begin at the beginning. But because I want to give my beloved viewers as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, I'm going to jump into this book at chapter 5, where Mr. Hartman talks about the fundamental conflict in American politics. He begins the chapter with a little history lesson about the importance of a thriving, prosperous middle class in bringing about and maintaining democracy, ideas that were strongly supported in the 1770s and 1780s by one of our nation's most important founding fathers, Thomas Paine. Well, all that talk about a strong, prosperous middle class and government of the people, by the people, for the people was not at all dilly-dilly with a member of British Parliament by the name of Sir Edmund Burke, who strongly supported the idea of an aristocracy, rule by a wealthy, powerful, privileged, and permanent elite class, with a king or queen at the top, dukes, duchesses, and all the rest of nobility, all the way down to knights and nobles, like Sir Edmund Burke. What's awesome to me is that rather than presenting the fundamental conflict in hard to understand abstract terms like most nerds would do, Mr. Hartman lays it out as essentially a conflict between just these two men, Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. Because Thomas Paine was one of our nation's most important founding fathers, I assume you already know who he was. If you don't, then our educational system is even more stupendously dumbed down than I thought. In case you don't know, it was Thomas Paine who first wrote down the words, United States of America. If you don't know who Edmund Burke was, that's understandable. It's supposed to be unthinkable that there could be people who believe in his aristocratic ideology. It's important to understand and remember that although Mr. Hartman lays out the fundamental conflict as being between Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine, there were, back in the 1700s, and still are today, lots of Americans who believe the exact same things as Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. The thing is, You're not going to hear anybody today admitting to believing in Burke's aristocratic ideology. That's because powerful, rich elitists today who believe pretty much the same things that Edmund Burke did are gutless cowards who ain't going to admit it. Which is why they'll tell you why their public position is that they're conservatives or libertarians, even liberals. But they are not going to tell you their private position, that they believe in rule of, by, and for a modern-day virtual aristocracy of filthy rich elitists and their global corporate friends who help make them even richer. Fortunately, back in the old days, men were men who could look you in the eye and speak the truth, tell you what they thought, tell you what they believed. And not all of what Edmund Burke believed was bad. For example, he thought it was a real bad idea getting into a conflict with what were then our American colonies. And he, in fact, figured out a way to prevent what turned into our Revolutionary War. Smart people solve problems. Geniuses prevent them. His idea was so genius that if King George had followed his advice, it's entirely possible that today we could be a British Commonwealth country, like Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. The point is that I am going to be cherry-picking quotes from Burke, as Thom Hartman did, because these particular quotes peel back the horse crap and reveal the aristocratic ideology that Burke believed. The same ideology that members of his rich elitist a-hole fan club still believe today. I'll put direct quotes of what Burke wrote on screen so you can get what he said directly from the horse's ass, I mean mouth, and then I'll translate, nerd whisperer style, what he said into plain modern English. In this quote, he essentially says, let the rich corporate owners do whatever they want, and they'll have the chance of being amongst the best. If you're like me, when I first read this, you may be wondering, amongst the best of what? At first I thought, this is just sophistry, so it doesn't have to make sense. Just has to sound good. But then I did some thinking, and I realized that he meant that they could be among the best men of merit. The men who deserved because they earned high status in the meritocracy of his day, which in those days in England was an actual aristocracy. His including the corporate rich in his aristocracy is important, as you'll see in a little while. He continues, still talking about rich corporate owners. They are, at the very worst, the thing that stabilizes a society. It's ironic that just last year, a modern-day rich corporate owner by the name of Charles Koch published a book saying he regrets using his wealth in a way that destabilized our society, driving partisan hatred and division in this country. The thing is, Mr. Koch almost certainly was and still is a firm believer in Edmund Burke's elitist ideology. I haven't read his book, but I suspect that at his age, looking back at the society-wide train wreck that he in a big way helped cause, he's genuinely sorry that he's going to be remembered for that. Burke continues in an almost comical way, portraying elites who are handed wealth, power, privilege, and social status on a silver platter through inheritance as victims. Not just victims of flattering suck-ups who want to leech off of their wealth and power, but also victims of thoughtless insults from rude, disrespectful, short-sighted, philosophical clowns. You know what that is? What struck me as funny was that Burke wrote this not long before the apparently short-sighted people of France, led by some philosophical clowns preaching democracy, took rude and disrespectful to a whole new level. That's because those democracy-loving philosophical clowns had started a ruckus called the French Revolution. All of France's wealthy, pampered, privileged elite aristocrats wound up getting dragged out of their castles to a guillotine. I would very much like to avoid seeing that happen here in America. There was one elite of France by the name of Lavoisier, I think, a chemistry nerd, true nerd. His death was a loss to humanity. Burke finishes here by saying that elite status determined by birth, by whose family somebody is born into, is natural, just, and good policy. Importantly, he works in there that elite status should not be exclusively determined by birth, by whose family somebody is born into. That allowed in corporate rich, who helped make the aristocrats even richer. Thom Hartman put this in a nutshell, saying, in short, Burke advocated for hereditary wealth and the rights of the aristocracy. Thomas Paine responded to that with a big old two-finger salute. At least he would have if that had been a thing back in the 1700s. I don't think it was, but what I do know for a fact is that Thomas Paine won that conflict back in the 1700s, because it was his ideas, not Burke's, that made it into our Constitution, and why the first three words of our Constitution are, "We the people." What's awesome to me is that quite a few of our other founding fathers knew all about this conflict and knew what a continuing threat Edmund Burke type elites would be to our democracy, which is why they included a way in our Constitution so that if we the people ever became such lazy, misguided dumbasses, that Burke types were able to take over what was supposed to be our government, we would have a way to take it back. I hate to disappoint drama queen types who love going out protesting injustice, but so-called leaders who do not give a flying crap about you and your silly-ass protests ain't gonna do a thing for you. Which is maybe why there ain't nothing about protesting in our Constitution.
Wake up, Pearl. Wake up.
In my next episode, I'll pick up where I left off with Thom Hartman explaining real Thomas Paine-style democracy, because that's the only way that we the people are going to be able to take our government back. A quick fun fact and teaser before I go. The crucial thing that Americans need to understand before we can even hope to take our government back has something to do with our country being called the United States. See ya. If you like this video, why not click the like button? I'll put a link to the next episode over here.